You're on Team Human, conscious intervention in the machine. When they monopolize, we share. When they weaponize, we socialize. When they enshittify, we just compost. I'm Douglas Rushkoff, and I'm on Team Human. Playing for Team Human today, science fiction, tech fact, and pluralist author Cory Doctorow. Cory's on tour for his new book, Enshittification, When Everything Suddenly Gets Worse and What to Do About It. And he made time to swing by the Team Human underground bunker for a conversation and hopefully a hug. Things don't have to get worse, not if we intervene on our own behalf. I'm Douglas Rushkoff, and you're on Team Human. Hey.
Hi, Doug. How are you?
Good. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
It's funny. I started jotting down books that I remembered that you wrote. And the order, it was just interesting. The order of your writing that it came to my head was Little Brother, then Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom, which may still be my favorite book of yours. Because it's so tied into all my sort of Life Inc., what's happening, and looking at a real case study of sort of corporatism as a way of life, as atmosphere.
It's also got that first novel energy, right? It's everything I ever thought of putting into a novel. That's why first novels are different.
Right. I know. That's the thing. It is true. Information doesn't want to be free.
Yeah.
Homeland.
Yeah.
Years at Boing Boing. And now pluralist.
Yeah. Pluralistic.
It's
Yeah.
pluralistic.
Yeah.
Right. So that's sort of how I think. But I mean, the pluralistic is the most daily, and everybody check out pluralistic for your daily dose. A few doses of Doctorow, actually.
Keeping notes in public is like the secret to my success. And it didn't set out to do this, but 50 to 60,000 blog posts later, it turns out that if every time something seems important to you, rather than like jotting a note to yourself in a little notebook, which if you're like me, you can't decipher your handwriting. And even if you can, you don't know what you meant because you skimp, right? You're like, oh, I'll figure this out later. When you write for strangers, you have to interrogate yourself, like why this seemed important enough to take note of. You have to elucidate it. You have to be clear. And then you get a database, right? You get like the literal database that's the back end of your blog.
Right.
But you also get like a mental database.
Right. No, that's nice. It's also nice, I keep and I really shouldn't be, just on a Mac yellow notepad thing. I keep this, note of ideas. So it's like watching TV, or are we thinking about something, or on a train? And I go, oh, this is an idea. If that ideas was just 30 minutes more developed and public. Yeah. Then the other thing about it is it's like every 5 or 10 ideas, one will get like 20, 30 comments and development.
Sure.
Like, ooh, that's something I should really write as an article.
Yeah.
So you're almost doing sort of open source readership collaboration.
Or it's like you're working on material on the road, right? I was just talking with Adam Conover about this because I was doing his show, and he's a stand-up, right? And so we were comparing what like writing in public to working on material on the road, and you try out a lot of different stuff, you cross stuff out, you double down on stuff. This is like Trump's unsung gift. He throws a lot of stuff at the crowd, and he's got a very good ear for the stuff the crowd responds to, and he doubles down on it. You can hear it. It's like he's like what's he like? He's like an auctioneer listening for bids, and the problem with Trump is he doesn't believe in anything. So he'll just double down he'll say a million things he doesn't believe.
Well, that's the superpower.
And double down on it.
He doesn't believe in
but
anything.
Like that's the difference, right? He's not just throwing out all the different things that matter to him and trying to figure out which things chime with the audience so that he can kind of find an in with that audience to get them to care about the things that matter to him. The only thing that matters to him is power, his own power, right? His own parochial interests. And so he'll just say whatever he thinks, whatever he thinks you want to hear him say.
Right. I mean, the way I've always felt about him is he sort of jumped into the standing wave of culture.
Yeah.
He was going and then filled it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter. I mean, that's why he was able to switch. Oh, I'm a Democrat. Oh, no, I guess I'm a Republican. Yeah. Oh, I'm going to be a fascist.
And, to this book, right, the book is emphatically not a book about consumerism and like how you can buy things that will make your life better or you know, make individual choices that'll make your life better. I think it's a systemic problem, but it's also not about particularly the cupidity or villainry of individual tech bosses. I mean, they're bad, right? And they shouldn't be forgiven for the bad things they've done, but they've stepped into like a tech boss shaped hole in the policy environment, right? You know, if Musk ODs on ketamine tonight, 10 big balls will fight it out for his job tomorrow, and whoever emerges victorious will be indistinguishable from him. It's the enshittigenic environment created by policy. And this is why it's so hard to fight, because it's really easy to get people angry about a person, but to get angry about the system that lets that person thrive. This is why, like in the 19th century, they called anti-Semitism the socialism of fools, right? If you observe like a system of finance capital that has subordinated the productive economy to itself and that is really structuring society and its productive activity to the benefit of a small group of elites, if you think the problem is the character of those elites, then you seize on some characteristic that, oh, that guy's a Rothschild. It's the Jews, right? As opposed to if you understand the system, then you're like, oh, it's not who's doing it. It's the system that allows them to do it.
But that's really hard for people to see, you know, to say, oh, we're playing a game here, that you are mistaking these social constructions or economic rules as conditions of nature.
Yeah, of course.
So, you know, it's like, so, you know, part of the problem with, and we should get to enshittification, we should define it for people who somehow missed it. But if you're living in a market that's depending on exponential growth, you know, and then you look back at the tax code and say, oh, well, look, capital gains are taxed low and dividends and earnings are taxed high. So what are people going to want? I want my company to grow so I can make money on capital gains. Well, why is the rule that way? I mean, if you change the rule.
It didn't come down off a mountain on 2 stone tablets. And, you know, it's funny because the right, when we're talking about whether we should have universal health care or whether we should have a decent system of food and shelter benefits or whatever, they say, oh, well, incentives matter. If you let people thrive without working, they'll never work. But when you say, well, what if we have a system that allows bosses to get away with maiming workers? Like, oh, well, the incentives don't really matter. They wouldn't do that. They wouldn't maim workers for profit. Why would the incentives matter, right? Incentives only matter when you're taking away stuff from poor people. They don't matter when you're giving lots of regulatory gifts to rich and powerful people.
It's as if, again, treating them as if they're not human. You know, but let's go to enshittification. So enshittification does the thing that I try to do in my writing since the beginning, is put words to something that people kind of know. And by articulating it, people can then make sense of it and see it and sort of alienate themselves from it in a different way. So for me, the thing I was always upset about, like since like 1993 when Wired came out, was, oh, there's this cool internet thing. Oh no, what are they doing to it? They're turning it from this good thing into this bad thing in all these ways. And I could list because of capitalism, because of extraction, because of turning into a Skinner box, because now people, you know, are being separated rather than connected. And enshittification really helps describe that process and really puts its finger, I think, on why it's inevitable for this to happen. It's sort of like enshittification is kind of like the next chapter of planned obsolescence in a certain way to the next place. So I was hoping maybe to hear what's the kind of your latest compelling, illustrative example for it. What's feeling like, oh, this is a good example of enshittification as a way of kind of sharing it with people who don't know precisely what it is?
Well, let me before I do that, say I don't think it's inevitable. In fact, the whole point of the enshittification analysis is that this is not iron laws of economics or great forces of history. These are policy choices taken in living memory by named individuals.
It's inevitable without intervention.
But we told them, right? When they did this stuff, we said, hey, if you like, you know, so take one example. There's this law, Section 1201 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. It establishes a new crime, a felony punishable by a 5-year prison sentence and a $500,000 fine for tampering with what's called an access control. So say you have a device like a printer, right? And you want to change the software in the printer so it will accept generic ink. If the people who make the printer put anything around the software that controls the access, it doesn't even have to be very good. It's effectively like the software version of drawing a red line around it and saying, don't look in this red line. It becomes a felony to look inside the red line. right? And so what we do is we invite people to draw a lot of red lines around their products so that if you want to do anything with them that their shareholders would disprefer, that makes things better for you at their expense, it becomes a felony to do it. Jay Freeman calls it felony contempt of business model, right? So like the person who did this, we know who it was. It was a guy called Bruce Lehman when he was Clinton's IP czar. When Al Gore was doing the information superhighway hearings, the National Information Infrastructure hearings, Lehman went and pitched this to him and he said, fuck off, that's a stupid idea. So Lehman went to Geneva to the World Intellectual Property Organization, the UN specialized agency that does IP laws. And he got them to pass 2 treaties. One's called the WIPO Copyright Treaty, one called the WIPO Performers and Phonograms Treaty. They called them the Internet Treaties. And it has this in it as a treaty obligation. Then he went back to Congress and he said, now you have to pass the law. And later on, boasting about this on stage, he said, I, quote, did an end run around Congress, right, by going to the UN to get this done. So we know, like, Bruce Lehman's still alive.
Right. And why? And what's his motivation?
Oh, he just wanted to make it so that if you, like, had a region-locked DVD player, you couldn't unlock it. It was the most petty fucking grift you can imagine. It was like, oh, well, it used to be when we had VCRs, that some were NTSC and some were PAL, right? They're 2 different standards for Europe and America. And so you could like window a release, right? If you released a PAL video in Europe, it wouldn't play on an American TV.
Right.
So you know that there wouldn't be any what they call parallel importations, people bringing it in from out of the country, right? And so you could charge different prices and you'd have like this kind of natural firewall. Now, again, no one came down off a mountain with 2 stone tablets and said you can charge different prices in Europe than America. That sounds like a you problem, right? If that's the way you optimize your business, not my problem, right? And then they're like, okay, well, DVDs, they've got a PAL and an NTSC output on the back of it, or you can put a DVD in a PAL player or an NTSC player.
Right.
And so we still want to have region codes. And so we're going to add, you remember this? Region codes for your DVD players?
So some Japanese tourist can't come to America, buy the 3 DVD set of The Godfather and watch it at home.
Bring it back to Tokyo.
Because for some reason we don't want him to be able to do that.
It's more like you can't go to India and buy DVDs at a 10th of the price and bring them back to America and watch them.
Right.
But like, this is not piracy, right? Like, going to a store and buying a licensed thing at the price that the merchant has asked for is the opposite of piracy.
It was not a problem when Japanese kids would come here and buy Beatles records.
Sure, exactly. Right. So it was just the most bullshit thing, right?
I remember that.
It's like hunting beavers to extinction because you want to make hats out of them,
right?
It's just like the craziest, stupidest reason to restructure our whole economy. It's one of the reasons people told Lehman that this was a bad idea. They were like, you want to do this for DVD players. And they wanted to do it for things like Sega Dreamcasts, right? Because they wanted to make sure that like, so Sega was like gimmicking the CDs, so that if you just made a CD with a Sega game on it, it wouldn't play in the Sega Dreamcast. You had to use their pressing plant, and then they charged games manufacturers gigantic amounts of money. It's like a prelude to the thing we have now, where like Unity charges 30 cents on every dollar.
So
does
Apple
Xbox
charges for everything in the store.
And so they just like they didn't want someone to like just
make a Sega game and sell it. They made the player
not a copyright violation for me to write a Sega game and sell it to you so you can play it on your Sega, right? Like the literal opposite of a copyright violation. They wanted to create this system of para copyright or private law, where you could take shareholder preferences and turn them into legal obligations.
Right, because we would like them to pay for access to our platform.
Sure, and so it's just like rent seeking, right? So, but like it's not like he was imagining that we'd reach the point we're at now. So there's one company called Chamberlain. They bought every single garage door opener company under the sun. It doesn't matter what the badge on your garage door opener says. It's a Chamberlain garage door opener. And they used to support this thing called HomeKit, which is a standard way to talk to home automation tools. And there's like a million apps that you could use to open your garage door, right? You could pair any of them with your garage door opener. And then once they had critical mass, they pushed an update that took away HomeKit support. Now you have to use their app. And their app shows you 7 ads before you can open your garage door. Right? It's just the most bullshit, penny ante, just garbage stuff, right? Except it's also the reason that like during the lockdown, all the ventilators are made by this one company called Medtronic. Medtronic, again, bought all of its competitors, did a tax inversion in Ireland. It's the world's largest tax inversion. They now pretend that they're an Irish company, so their money can float in a state of untaxable grace somewhere over the Irish Sea. They use the same thing to stop you from activating a new part when you fix a ventilator. So if you like put a screen in a ventilator that's got a busted screen, they have to type an unlock code in or it won't work. And they just charge you $200 to type the unlock code in. It's just like, again, like this petty grift.
Right.
So that's bad under normal circumstances. But during lockdown, hospitals' own medical technicians were doing this maintenance. They were taking donor screens out of dead ventilators and putting them in working ventilators with dead screens, and they wouldn't work. And it wasn't like the Medtronic guy could fly to you because the planes weren't flying. So we had like global shutdown of an appreciable fraction of our ventilators because of this. Now, there's a funny story because there's an ex-Medtronic technician in Poland, totally anonymous, who still had the thing that generated unlock codes, and they burned, it's called a FPGA, like a programmable chip. They made these FPGA-based unlockers illegal because the European Union has the same law as America.
Right.
The U.S. Trade Representative made them pass it. And they started building these like unlock devices, these defeat devices, into whatever enclosures they had handy during the lockdown. And hospitals started to get mysterious packages in the mail, and it would be like a guitar pedal with a USB port, and you'd plug it into your ventilator, it would unlock your ventilator, or like a table lamp, or like a clock radio.
Right.
Any box that this guy had or this person had, we don't know their gender, they were doing this with. And it's a crime under Article 6 of the Copyright Directive to do this because the U.S. Trade Representative made them do this. So, like Bruce Lehman, we told him at the time that this was going to be everything.
And we, meaning the EFF.
And policy people. I mean, this was before my time. In 1996. I was 24 years old.
But our side of the thing.
But Pam Samuelson, she was on our board. I think she's still on our board. She, arguably one of the top 3 copyright scholars in the world, right? Is like filing papers about this, right? She's actually one of the reasons that Al Gore kicked Bruce Lehman out of the room is because when they put this in front of Al Gore, she led this response of like scholars and experts to say this is a bad idea. And then he took it to Geneva. So he knew what the experts said the consequences would be. And he either rationalized his way into not believing them, or he rationalized his way into thinking that it wasn't as important as the short-term gain that he would get for the people that he was briefing for. And, Congress bears some responsibility here. Barney Frank, was one of the co-sponsors. There's lots of Dems who are culpable in this stuff. And Lehman was Bill Clinton's IP czar. It's not like he worked for George Bush. But, this stuff is now like hanging around like a bad smell. And so when you say it's inevitable, it's not inevitable, right? Like like the reason that I don't like the word inevitable is that I think it makes people feel helpless.
Right. I've been feeling pretty helpless.
Yeah.
So I have. I mean, so it feels inevitable with the given circumstances. And because we're not most of our listeners are not policy people, and I tell them about Section 230A and stuff. I try. But it's almost like as non-policy plugged in people who understand some of the tech and all. I do want to kind of define for them. I mean, they kind of know. Shoshana Berger kind of helped people understand.
Zuboff, you mean?
Zuboff. Oh, yeah. Oh, that was Shoshana
Zuboff
Berger's
and I disagree rather a lot. So
a lot. I know.
My account is very different from hers.
No, her account did, but she did help popularize people's understanding of, these companies had it good, but then they took something and made it worse.
I think that's where we agree. And we also agree about the importance of privacy.
Right. No, that's where I am with her too. But otherwise, there's a whole lot of other stuff.
I don't think they built a mind control ray. Right. No. I think everyone who's claimed to have a mind control ray was kidding themselves or everyone else. And I think when someone says like where Mesmer and Rasputin and MK Ultra and pickup artists and neurolinguistic programming weirdos failed, I have succeeded, but with big data.
Yeah.
And the reason you're grampy as a QAnon is because I built this mind control ray to sell your nephew a fidget spinner. And then, Robert Mercer stole it and made Grampy into a conspiratorialist. I think that gives them too much credit.
Right.
And I think it helps them sell ads.
Right. The social dilemma thing did that. So then the question is, so if they did that with the social dilemma, and this social media is going to program us into becoming, Nazis and all that, and that's really, the devil made me do it, or the tech made me do it. Do you think AI has that same potential?
100%. Yeah, no.
Or at the same fake potential?
Yeah, I think that an AI can't do your job, but an AI salesman is pushing on an open door when he convinces your boss to fire you and replace you with an AI that can't do your job, right? Your boss is insatiably horny to replace you with software, right?
Right.
And so they are easy marks for the story that AI can do your job. And I actually think what's going to happen now with AI, because we have more than $500 billion in CapEx and capital expenditure on AI. The companies at most by their own account are making $45 billion a year total across the whole sector. That's a grossly inflated number. That's things like Microsoft giving $10 billion worth of tokens for their cloud computing to OpenAI. And then OpenAI gives it back to Microsoft, and Microsoft says, "We just made $10 billion in revenue."
Right.
This is like not how revenue works.
Right. You look at Oracle and NVIDIA,
yeah,
and it's
energetically
like,
saving this. Well, and yes, you have even the investment numbers are cooked, right? Because you have them passing around the same $100 billion energetically, and each of them claiming it as either an outbound investment or inbound investment capital. Oracle gets money from NVIDIA and then buys NVIDIA chips.
Yeah, I know. I was looking at that thinking, what is that?
This is a very
right. It's like cable TV on steroids, right?
It's like you go and buy all the lemonade in your kid's lemonade stand, and your kid declares himself to be an entrepreneurial genius, right? I think
the government asks for tax.
Yeah. So I think what's going to happen is we're going to replace people who do jobs that matter with AI that don't do those jobs, and then the foundation models aren't going to be viable, and they're going to go away, and we're going to have nothing. I think that's what's going to happen. Right. So we're going to take like everyone who figures out whether you're eligible for a loan or whether to take your kids away or who provides customer service or lots of programmers. And we are going to fire them. They are going to either retrain or become what's euphemistically called discouraged, right? So they're going to permanently leave the job market, not least because employers have a bias against people who've been out of work for any length of time, right? They won't hire them again. So often once you've been out of the job market for an appreciable period of time, you can't re-enter it except, doing gig work or whatever. And then the foundation models are going to switch off because you can't just keep lighting other people's money on fire forever. Eventually they get tired of you doing that to their money. The OpEx, so like there's lots of things that just weren't viable if you had to consider the amount of money it costs to build them, but you can operate them once the people who built them went bankrupt. That happened kind of with the railroads, right? A lot of people went bankrupt laying rail, but then the rail was still there. And other people were able, because they could get the rails effectively for free out of the bankruptcy.
Well, a lot of people went bankrupt building the internet. We had the .com boom.
I was going to say WorldCom, right? So WorldCom was this giant fraud. CEO died in prison for lying about fiber orders, but he put a lot of fiber in the ground.
Yeah.
Right? AT&T just bought some dark fiber in my neighborhood and lit it up. It's old WorldCom fiber. I now have 2 gigabit symmetrical fiber in my neighborhood in LA because of WorldCom. So it's bad that it was a fraud. He stole a bunch of money from normie investors and destroyed their finances. He deserved to die in prison, but at least there was something left over because the OpEx, right, the operating expenditures to make the fiber work, very little.
Right.
The CapEx to dig up the ground and put the fiber in, a lot.
Huge, yeah.
The thing about AI is the OpEx and the CapEx are really high. And so even if you can buy the data centers for pennies on the dollar, you can't run them.
Unless you have cheap nuclear fusion something.
There's no cheap nuclear fusion.
No.
There is an investment bubble in cheap nuclear fusion. There is no cheap nuclear fusion. What there is solar that's going to be too cheap to meter.
I just want to say you're welcome to the thousands of listeners who phoned, emailed, or written in to express your appreciation for Kobe dryer sheets. I know they've changed your lives and you just don't know how to respond. Really, you don't need to do anything more than use them instead of those plastic, chemical-filled, evil, and demonically possessed dryer sheets of the others. Actually, they're not even demonically possessed because they're not organic vessels. Kobe dryer sheets could be possessed if they were so inclined because they are real cotton made lovingly by appropriately compensated labor and renewable energy facilities and completely biodegradable. In a sense, every dryer sheet you buy is being rescued from spiritual attack or other exploitation. You can get a 10% discount by going to KobeDryerSheets.com and using the discount code RUSH10. Right. And that's the thing. So solar is cheap.
Solar is very cheap,
but
everywhere
we're acting
except
like
here.
It's not.
Yeah, well, it's this America lives in a bubble where
But then we're told, aren't they sending little children into the rare earth metal mines to make them? And
the material bill for solarizing and electrifying the planet, right? So all the stuff we would need, all the minerals we would need, it's about 1/17 of what we dig up every year to do fossil.
Really?
Yeah. So it's true. It's a big material bill. It's like, but the other thing is that the material bill gets lower every year because we're like, lithium's expensive and difficult to handle and in short supply. Turns out we can make batteries out of sodium.
Right.
Sodium's like the second most common, most abundant element on Earth.
Yeah.
Right. We're smelting aluminum. It's very expensive. But there is a high material bill, but the efficiencies of these panels keep going up. And when we say that we have used a mineral in an application and we can't recover it, right? So we put the lithium in the battery, we can't get the lithium out again when the battery is no good.
Right.
What we mean is that it's too energy intensive to get the lithium out of the battery. Well, energy is getting cheaper, right? The recoverable minerals from old panels, from old batteries keeps going up.
Right.
And then the efficiency keeps going up. So we're taking panels that were 20% efficient and we are recovering all the minerals in them, 99% of the minerals in them, in solar-powered factories. And then we're building 2 panels out of the minerals that were in one panel. And instead of being 20% efficient, they're 40% efficient.
Right.
So like China made less money selling solar panels last year, but they exported more wattage because the cost of panels is going down. So it's actually a problem getting people to invest in utility scale solar because it's so cheap that they don't know how they're going to recoup their investment.
Right. Well, they should make like GE and sell the watts rather than the stuff.
Or, treat it as a public good or have a subsidy or, or make it a consumer surplus, right? Like you don't care if you're putting solar on your roof. Right. Whether it's cheaper next year.
But then there's all these logical ways that things can be better, and they're not because I guess companies and governments are incentivized differently.
Well, it depends on where you're talking about. And in Texas, they passed or they mooted a law that did not pass ultimately that would have required for every watt of solar that was installed that they would have to build a watt of natural gas capacity. And farmers from rural districts in Texas went berserk because solar is like how they're making ends meet.
Right.
And they called it DEI for fossil fuels. And they were so angry about it that the Texas legislature voted down this proposal, right? So there's a lot of people you wouldn't think of as being on side with this who
sort
are on
of
side
waking
with
up
it.
to that.
And, you have like farmers who are discovering that they can increase crop yields by interleaving panels with row crops because it can shade crops that in a climate blasted world are now outside of their healthy environment. And then because it traps moisture, it reduces the amount of irrigation you need to do. And because that moisture is beneath the solar panel, it's cooling the solar panel to its optimal operating temperature. So it's providing shelter for pollinators. And if you have like ruminants, if you're grazing livestock, not goats because they eat the panels, but anything else, cows, sheep, they love solar panels because they sit underneath them in the climate blazing sun, and you get higher meat yields out of your livestock as well. So there's a lot going on that's very good, and we're dancing around this. We're talking about Bill McKibben's new book here, right? It's Here Comes the Sun. And about a blog post that as we record this, he's just published about this. And he's got all this good news, right? We are way ahead of schedule for, cutting our carbon emissions, for heading to zero and so on. The thing is that climate effects are also way ahead of schedule. Our models underestimated how fast the poles would melt, how much permafrost we'd lose, and how quickly that methane, which is shorter lived than CO2, but is a much more potent greenhouse gas than CO2. So it doesn't stay in the atmosphere as long, but while it's there, it's very, very bad. We're seeing effects in the Gulf Stream that are much worse. We're seeing effects in the jet stream that are much worse. So we may not have had as long as we thought. And I think that there's a parallel here to what's going on with technology. So as you say, I've been doing this for a long time. I've worked for the Electronic Frontier Foundation for most of my adult life. I'm in my 24th year with them now, and I'm 54, so do the math. I, for a long time, was like just trying to get people to care about this stuff. because it's very abstract, right? In the same way that the climate is very abstract, right? The greenhouse effect, when we call it that, was very abstract. CO2, people didn't know what it stood for. They didn't understand it. Now a lot of people understand it, and they understand it because maybe it's too late, right? Because their house is on fire. And the same thing is happening with computers, where like you have Bruce Lehman saying, well, what do I care about problems with computers if I can protect this DVD racket and make sure that everyone who makes a Sega Dreamcast game gives 20% of their gross to Sega, right? And now we're like, oh, it's the ventilators and the fact that, you can't fix a tractor, and the fact that there are people with implanted eyes who are having those eyes remotely bricked by the manufacturer because they've decided to get out of the cybernetic eye business.
Has that one actually happened?
That has actually
Because that was like, I remember you used to make up stories about that. What if they, they take your hearing aid and they don't let you listen to copywritten music?
That has exactly happened. Yeah, no, that has.
So there's people who cannot see.
There are people who they called them bionic eyes. It's a visual sensor wired into your optic nerve, and now it's bricked. And
bricked means turned off.
Yeah. And it means rendered inoperable. Right. And it's bad enough that the company did this and they didn't have a long-term plan and so on. But because there's an access control for the software in the eye, you can't reverse engineer it to reactivate it. Right. Because this law that was created to regulate the Sega Dreamcast and the DVD player is hanging around like a bad smell today. And so popping the stack 3 layers up here, when I say this is about the enshittigenic environment and not about the individual people, right? If we were going to blame an individual, let's blame Bruce Lehman, right? Not the CEO of the Bionic Eye Company. Because you fire that guy and a new guy will step up and do the same thing, right? Back to our friends on the right, incentives matter. Right. And so if we incentivize firms to externalize their costs, to seek rent, to abuse people that they have locked in, then we should be surprised if they don't do it. It's not to say that we shouldn't hold them in disapprobation, right? Those people shouldn't be welcome in polite society. We should shout mean things at them if we see them on the street. We should, shame our friends if they go to work for them. But let's not mistake their cupidity for the source. It is the effect.
Right. So this is just corporatism expressing itself through digital technologies and digital business plans.
Yeah. And, it is like the climate emergency where you have, say, a breakdown from the permafrost, which releases methane, which makes things hotter, which causes other things to break down. You have these vicious cycles, or what people think that a positive feedback loop is something good. Positive feedback loops are very bad, usually, right? Yeah. It's a thing that just makes something go faster and faster. You want negative feedback
like
loops.
Like a person getting kind comments from their AI.
Right. And so you just get more and you then ask the AI for more comments. Right. Exactly. So this positive feedback loop is also happening in digital technology because if you can extract rent, if you can exclude competitors, if you can capture suppliers and customers, then you are also able to capture your regulator. So when we first met, it was sort of during the years of the copyright wars, the Napster wars, right? And at that time, there were like 100 tech companies duking it out with 7 entertainment companies.
Right.
And the 100 tech companies in aggregate were 2 orders of magnitude, 100 times larger than these 7 entertainment companies. And if all you did was like look at the capital they could mobilize in the policy arena, you would assume that the tech companies would kick the ass of these media companies. The thing was, 100 companies are a rabble, right? They can't agree on anything. Mm-hmm. 7 entertainment companies are a cartel. When you have a sector with 7 companies in it, the way you progress through the ranks is you jump from one to the other. Right. All the people in those C-suites have all worked together. They're godparents to each other's children. They are executors of each other's estates.
Right.
They are,
royal family.
Yeah. They're pals, right? Yeah. They're not the deep state or whatever, but they are they're a milieu, right? And they know each other, right? They're in polycules with each other. And so they end up with this kind of tacit and sometimes explicit conspiracy. And so every policy venue where the Napster wars were fought, you had entertainment speaking with one voice, and you had tech all over the shop.
Right.
You had Vichy nerds who were siding with the entertainment industry. You had people who were standing their ground. You had people in between. They had no discipline because there was 100 of them. Now, ideally, what you would do is you would observe this phenomenon and you would say, aha, we need to take the media companies and shatter them into 100 companies too. So it's a fair fight. I tell my libertarian friends, like, even if you are such a hardcore libertarian that you can no longer open your copy of Atlas Shrugged because the pages are stuck together, and you think that the only job of the government is to enforce contracts, if you're going to enforce a contract, you have to be more powerful than the parties to the contract. The smallest government you can have is determined by the largest corporation you're willing to tolerate, right? So, you observe this like dysfunction in the policy arena. Ideally, what you do is shatter the 7 media companies. That's not what we did. We let the tech companies engage in this kind of incestuous orgy, gobble each other up, turn into, 5 giant websites filled with screenshots of text from the other 4, right? And the media companies also did it, right? 5 giant publishers, 4 giant studios, 3 giant labels, 2 companies that do all the apps, 1 company that does all the ebooks and the audiobooks. And then on the other side, it's like 7 AI companies, 5 social media, same thing. Everywhere you look, it's the same thing. And they're all cozy. They're all in bed together.
And that leads to the circumstances and incentives that make our technologies work against us rather
it leads
than
to
for us.
Regulatory capture.
Right.
So it means that the regulators, so like you have companies that are not disciplined by their competitors. They don't worry about you jumping ship because they've locked you in. But they also don't worry about the state stepping in to discipline them because they can control the state because they're so big. They're bigger than the state. So lots of bad things that happen.
Unless you argue, as Bannon would, that the new Trump regime is finally big enough and strong enough to make those guys.
It'd be great if they did that.
They came to the coronation. They bent the knee.
But what have they done for us? Right? We
for
had
us nothing.
Yeah. So we had for example, there was a merger underway when Trump took office that his FTC intervened to stop. It was the merger between Juniper and Cisco. So these are the 2 biggest makers of industrial networking equipment. So if you are in a office building, you look on the ceiling, you will see a little disc on the ceiling. That's a Wi-Fi repeater. It's made by one of those 2 companies. They're about to merge into one company, right? A $14 billion merger. And Trump's FTC moved to stop it, or DOJ, I beg your pardon, DOJ moved to stop it. Juniper hired Trump podcaster, like a MAGA podcaster, gave him $1 million. He went and just camped out on the 5th floor of the DOJ building in DC where the antitrust division is, grabbed people going out of their office and demanded that they drop the case. So Laura Loomer, tweets at the president and gets the number 2 and number 3 person at the DOJ fired. And Juniper gets to go ahead with a $14 billion merger for a $1 million investment, right? Trump isn't just bad at doing his job to the extent that his job is looking out for the interests of the American people. He's a cheap fucking date. $1 million to get a $14 billion merger through. That is stuff you find down the back of the sofa cushions if you're Juniper. So the thing is, you get this regulatory capture and it enables companies that are already too big to fail and too big to care to do even worse things without worrying not just about a competitor eating their lunch because they've sucked up all the market oxygen, they've bought all the shelf space, they've outmaneuvered all their competitors. It allows them to also ensure that the regulators won't step in. So a lot of the bad things that happen in our world today are because of our privacy being invaded.
Right. But pulling back to the bigger picture.
Yeah.
So we're looking at the process through which potentially great technologies end up being shitty.
Yeah.
Now, and I get that one of the important distinctions here is to say it's not because Musk is bad or Eric Schmidt is bad. It's because of these systems, these landscapes are incentivized in ways and regulated in ways that allow for monopolies, monopsomies, and
oligopolies, oligopsonies.
Exactly. All those things. But then I look back and say, even before these kinds of systems were in place, take iron ore.
Mm-hmm.
We get iron ore. Whoa, isn't that smart? They took these rocks and melted them and smashed them and they got metal. And it's oh, we can now make plows and hoes and forks and things. And then some dudes say, yeah, and we can make swords and chains. And thanks to swords and chains, we basically got the patriarchy, beginning of colonialism. And it's like, there seems to be, and that was why I used the word inevitable. And I didn't mean it in the sense of inevitable forever, but there always seems to be the malintentioned dominator exploiting people using a technology tend to beat the people who are using it in other ways.
So there is something different about digital technology that I think is really important. I'm not like broadly a techno-exceptionalist, but there is a thing about digital technology that distinguishes it from iron ore and railroads and other technologies, and that is its flexibility, right? So, computer scientists would say the only computer we know how to make is something called the Turing-complete universal von Neumann machine. And what that means is that the computer that we know how to make, every one of them is in some way equivalent because they can all execute every valid program. So you can't make a computer that can only run programs that don't displease the shareholders of the company that made it. You can make any program. And so what that means is that anytime someone installs a 10-foot pile of shit in your software, someone else can give you an 11-foot ladder, right? And so if someone says, okay, well, we're going to lock you out of using generic ink in your printer, someone can write the program that lets you use the generic ink. But as we've said, IP laws intervene to stop it.
Right.
So this flexibility of digital, it lets companies change the rules of the game after the product is deployed. It lets them exert control over the technology after it's in the field. It gives them a force multiplier for every venal base instinct that you're just identifying as the thing that makes you build chains and swords. But it also gives everybody who wants to escape their grasp a tool for doing it too. And it imposes a kind of discipline. So we were talking about how you have discipline from competition. You have discipline from regulators. That's gone away. But you have discipline from technology itself. So imagine this is a product planning meeting for our website. And you're running the meeting and you say, now, everyone knows that our KPI, the thing our boss is going to judge us on, is our top line ad revenue. I've been doing some back of the envelope math. I think if we make the ads 20% more invasive and obnoxious, we'll get 2% more revenue, right? At this point, someone who doesn't give a damn about like user welfare is going to stick their hand up and say like, I love how you think, Elon, but has it occurred to you, you make the ads 20% more obnoxious, 40% of our users are going to go type, how do I block ads into a search engine, right? And indeed, 51% of web users have blocked ads. It's the largest consumer boycott in human history.
Because they abuse the privilege.
Because they abuse the privilege. Now, apps. Apps are like the web, except they're a closed platform and not an open platform. And because there's an access control around them, it's illegal to reverse engineer them and modify how they work. 51%
and you're afraid. They tell you you're going to ruin your phone. Bad people, Russians are going to come.
That too, although maybe people would, if you could start a business based on helping people unlock their phones, maybe they would run a different campaign. But it's a felony to reverse engineer the app to add the ad blocker to it.
So if I send my phone to a guy on eBay to unlock it or whatever, and
it depends on what tool they're using. But broadly, yes. So doing things that involve bypassing an access control is a felony. And so
it's interesting because it used to be, I remember as a kid, what this brings up for me, on the back of the TV, it always used to say, no user serviceable parts, hazard of electric shock.
Well, that's because CRTs will in fact kill you dead even after you've unplugged. Yeah, if you've got a big CRT at home, don't take the back off and let you know what you're doing. It's CRTs.
So they're not lying. It wasn't just to keep me
lethal,
from
CRTs
putting in my
retain
own
a lethal charge long after they've been unplugged.
Okay.
They are in fact extremely dangerous. Plus they implode and shower you with. CRTs are really dangerous.
All right. So though, it turns out I tried to yank out the battery in my phone, and I did it wrong, and it went.
And the batteries also are bombs. Yeah. We go onto the app, right? And we're in the same product planning meeting. And the person running the meeting says, okay, well, we're going to make the ads 20% more invasive and obnoxious on the app. And the same person who asked the question before says, why are you confining yourself to making the ads 20% more obnoxious? It doesn't matter if someone searches for how do you block ads in an app, because the answer is you can't. 51% of web users have done it. 0% of app users have done it, because it's a felony to reverse engineer the app.
So let's make a 2,000% more obnoxious ad.
That's right. And get a gigantic lift in our top line revenue. And so again, you just see how like the discipline melts away. And if you think about individuals as people who have good impulses and bad impulses, and firms as composed of factions that want to do good things and bad things, the thing that determines whether you win out is often the external forces. Right? Do you get punished or rewarded for doing the right thing or the wrong thing? That's why, societally we have things like shame, but we also have things like something that stops you from hopping over the side of the road and into a busy intersection unless you use the crosswalk. Sometimes we have these like pedestrian barriers, right? Because we create these architectures that rein in people's more reckless or base impulses.
But then why is digital different if we don't have access to digital anymore? It's like saying ham radio is different.
So the difference is that if you're playing sim regulator and you're saying, what do I do to correct this systemic problem?
Right.
If we're talking about railroads, well, you've got a limited toolkit, right? You can like lay new track or whatever. If you're talking about digital, you've got a whole set of possible outcomes.
And are there industries that in the last 50 years have sim regulated in the favor of the people?
Telephones, right? So it used to be that if you had a Sprint phone and you wanted to go to Verizon, you'd have to tell all your friends a new phone number.
Right, you lose your number.
Right? And we did this like one weird trick where you like click a mouse and your phone comes over, and now like nobody gives a damn which carrier you're using.
And the prices went down.
And there's a million, they're called virtual network management organization.
Versions of Sprint and T-Mobile, basically.
Right, yeah. So Wind and so on that are all around, Ryan Reynolds company and whatever. So this was really good. And you think about social media, and people are often like, you are so weak-willed for using Facebook, or they say, you have been brainwashed by Facebook. The evil sorcerer hacked your dopamine loop. But what if the reason we're on Facebook is that we love the people there more than we hate Mark Zuckerberg? And it's just really hard to get them to leave. Economists call it a collective action problem, right? So like you've got some people who matter to you on Facebook, and some of them are there because like they have a rare disease, and that's where the people who have the same rare disease as them are meeting. And some of them are there because that's where their customers, their audience are. Some are there because they emigrated from another country, and that's how they stay in touch with those people. Some are there because that's how they organize the Little League carpool, right? And you don't just have to convince your friends to leave. You have to convince them to convince all those other people to leave, right? Well, there's like no technical reason that if you leave Facebook, you wouldn't be able to see those messages. When Facebook started, they had a problem, which was that everyone who had social media already had a MySpace account, right?
Right.
And they didn't say, well, come to Facebook and like admire our superior graphic design and our better user agreement. They said, here is a bot. You give it your password and login for MySpace. We will send the bot to MySpace several times a day, pretend to be you, log it in, grab everything in the feed waiting for you, stick it in your Facebook feed. You can reply to it there. We'll push it back out to MySpace.
It was like the old Mac switch campaign when they got you to switch from PC to Mac.
By making an interoperable version of Office, right? They made iWork.
Yeah.
So if you did this to Facebook today, they would nuke you till you glowed. They'd say you violated Section 12.1 of the DMCA Act, that you'd stolen their trade secrets, you violated their trademarks, their copyrights, and their patents, that you were a tortious interferer with their contract, that you'd violated the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, right? Like they throw the book at you, right? And if we were to say that Facebook had to support some portability tool, and there are ones that exist already. If you've heard of Mastodon, it's this like open source version. It's sort of like Twitter, but you can have lots of different servers for it. It's really easy. If you sign up for a server, any server that you're on can talk to all the other servers. And so just like if you're on email at Google, you can send email to people on Outlook. But you might not like the people running your server. You might join the server and be like, oof, these people are giving me the ick. You're not stuck there. The way Mastodon is designed, you can like with one click just get a little file that has everyone you follow and everyone who follows you and your mutes and your blocks and so on. And then if you go to another server, you put that file there and then just everyone moves over, just like if you switch your phone number from Verizon to Sprint. And so we could say to Facebook, okay, you are now required to support this. people who leave Facebook, go to Mastodon or Blue Sky or even Twitter or, Truth Social, right? Have to be able to communicate with the people that they left behind.
Right.
So there's just no switching costs.
Right. It's portability. It's like the seasteading dream where you detach, float over to the one you like better.
But costlessly.
Right.
Right? Because I think seasteading is about abandoning the people who don't like you anymore because of the bad things you did. Yeah. Right? I think this is more like staying with the people that you like, but leaving the situation you don't. Right. And so it's more like Berlin before and after the wall. Yeah. Right? If you went over the wall, you said goodbye to everything you owned and everyone you loved forever. Right. But today, if you move from Kreuzberg to the Kudamm, you just get on the U-Bahn and you can go back and see your friends again. Right.
I want you to understand why these aren't just a silly product that's like a little bit better. It's the guy, Tom, who makes these dryer sheets is thinking about the whole thing. So like the labor that makes it, how they grow the cotton, how they put this together. You can have like a nice, totally organic cotton t-shirt and it says organic and wonderful, but the manufacturing of that thing uses all these chemicals and all this waste and all this crap. They make these things with that perfect little cotton, but then they have a new process to fabricate the cotton so it doesn't put all that crap. And then when you get it, you get this thing that's like not bad. You just put it in the washer and use it as a dryer sheet, and you take it out, you throw it away like with your friggin' compost. It's like and it biodegrades, and it's this kind of perfect cycle of life thing. And that's the difference between this and his change diapers that he's coming out with soon and all these other products, is that they're actually sort of end-to-end part of the regenerative cycle and not just, greenwashed, oh, this is good for the world.
That's beautiful.
I mean, there's examples of enshittification that got turned to good. True. In other words, I'm thinking like, let's say the algorithms used on Twitter and Instagram are enshittifying. And then, not that they're great, but TikTok comes along and says, what if we use that algorithm to introduce new things to people they haven't seen before, just in order to, you remember when they did that? Yeah. So every 10th thing you get is like sort of right. It's like, ooh, so sometimes enshittifying innovations are actually clever and useful if used differently.
You raise a good point, and I often say that tech bosses are guilty of something I call vulgar Thatcherism. So, Margaret Thatcher used to say, there is no alternative. It's something she said so often, they called her Tina. There is no alternative. And what she meant was really like, don't try to think of an alternative, right? Like I'm a science fiction writer. My job is to think of alternatives all day long, right? And, tech bosses want you to think this too. They want you to think, oh, well, if you have a suggestion algorithm, you have to tolerate being manipulated by it or angered or being out of control of it. You can't have a suggestion algorithm and also decide what it's suggesting. That's like asking for water that's not wet, right? You can't have friends and not have Mark Zuckerberg listen to everything you say. You can't have a phone that works unless Tim Cook can take 30 cents out of the pocket of everyone you give $1 to.
Right.
You can't have a search engine that works unless Sundar Pichai can spy on you from asshole to appetite. And the thing is, these are fully separable propositions. Right? It's the Monty Python sketch where they've hired an architect and he's stepping through the luxury flats they're going to build, and he keeps telling them where the whirling blades are that render people into, like tiny pieces. And they keep going like, well, why do you have these whirling blades in here? And he's like, well, why would I build a building that didn't have these whirling blades in it, right? These are fully separable, right? It is their rhetorical sleight of hand to assert that you cannot have one without the other. And one of the things that, this thing where you modify the technology, this interoperability does, is it lets you transform the pre-feast offer where the chef comes by and crams everything that's in the kitchen down your throat into an a la carte menu where you choose which parts of it you're going to keep and which parts of you don't, right? An ad blocker is a way for the publisher to make an offer to you, right? We are going to cram 17 million ads down your eyeballs in order for you to look at this content. And you say, how about, nah. How about nah?
How about none?
Yeah, and then they can make a counteroffer, right? Like, if you believe in the theory of markets, I'm not a great believer in this, but the theory of markets here
is better than the theory of forced.
Yeah, but the markets are aggregating information, right? You have this series of offers being made by different merchants in the economy. You have people who either accept or reject those offers, and ideally, what you get is bargaining, right? It's not just a binary signal. Oh, that's too much. I don't want this. It might be, I want this part, but not that part, right? In design, there's this idea of paving the desire paths, which is like if you imagine laying out a campus, you don't pave any of the paths in the first couple of years. Then you look at where people have walked through the grass and you pave those paths.
They mentioned that in My Dinner with Andre.
Is that right?
He mentions that. Andre Gregory.
So, Twitter, when it launched, had almost no features, right? And then the users started to do things like type RT and then paste in the text of a tweet for retweet. And then Twitter was like, oh, look at that. The users like retweeting. We'll add that. And then they started doing QT for quote tweet. Now, users like that too, right? So there is a way to have co-determination between firms and their users.
Oh, yeah.
But there has to be space for it. And if you, one of the things that is different from the old internet and today, it's not that, people who run services don't make bad decisions that make the services shit. They did that a long time ago. That's the story of MySpace.
Yeah.
The difference is that we're locked into these platforms, that even after it's long past the time where you like double tap them and stick them in a shallow grave, they are still like the thing that you end up using. So like take Uber. Uber soaks up $31 billion in capital from the Saudi royal family, funneled to them by Masayoshi Son and SoftBank. This is the guy who, gave us WeWork and is now OpenAI, right? Now the guy giving billions to OpenAI. They lose 41 cents on every dollar they make for 13 years. They drive every rival taxi company in most cities out of business. Every time someone tries to start a rival rideshare program, they lose money until they go out of business. We have a lost decade in transit investment because in a lot of places, like, why would we invest in buses when Ubers are so cheap? And then they reach this point where they double the price of the rides and they have the revenue to the users, right? This is a very powerful form of lock-in because the only way to avoid it is to have a time machine. I live in Burbank, right? It's butt of many jokes. But we have a great little train station next to the airport, and you can get the Amtrak down to San Diego there. And so I got it's called the Surfliner. It runs down the California coast. Beautiful train. So I get off the Surfliner one Sunday afternoon after doing a speaking gig in San Diego. I'm wearing a suit. It's 115 degrees. I've got a suitcase with me. There's no cabs in the cab rank because there's 13 cabs left in Burbank. There's no buses running on Sundays because we've discontinued Sunday bus service because Ubers were so cheap. There's also no Ubers available. The only thing I can do is book an Uber Black for $90 to go a mile and a half to my house, right? So what do I do to escape that lock-in?
You take your suit off and the shirt off. You go in your
I walk home in my underwear, right? Yeah, and hope that I don't get sunburned. So we like to think of all of this stuff as being about individual choices. And we say, oh, well, why did you choose to buy on Amazon? You should choose to buy somewhere else. Well, okay, but Amazon drove most of the other merchants out of business.
And it's going to come tomorrow.
And they also have sweetheart deals with the USPS to deliver. And also they are able to they do this thing called most favored nation. So to understand how the Amazon lock-in works, the majority of affluent houses, like a giant supermajority of affluent households in America, have Amazon Prime. Remember, 90% of half the consumption in America is the top 10% of households, right? So like if you want to sell a thing and you can't reach the top 10% of households, you're out of business. Those households all have Prime. The majority of Prime having households start their search for products on Prime. If they find it, they stop. And they don't price comparison either. To sell on Prime, you have to give up 45 to 51 cents out of every dollar in junk fees. So it's advertising fees and fulfillment by Amazon fees and Prime fees and so on. So most merchants don't have a 45 to 51% margin to begin with, right?
And they have to promise, I know this because I sold on Amazon, you have to not have it up anywhere else for cheaper.
That's where I was headed with this. So if you've got a 45 to 51% bite out of your margin, you got to raise your prices on Amazon. But you may have noticed Amazon's prices aren't more expensive than other people's prices. And that's because of this thing called most favored nation, which is the thing where Amazon has to have your lowest price, which means that in your own store, at your factory, at Target and Walmart, at the mom and pop store down the block, you have to charge as much as you charge on Amazon. So Amazon is imposing an economy-wide tax. Right. And so it's hard to avoid Amazon. And even when you avoid Amazon, you're still paying an Amazon tax, right? So Amazon has got you locked in. And of course, none of those other merchants have Amazon's network of suppliers. So Amazon charges so much for Prime to its suppliers that Prime costs Amazon nothing. So if you buy a thing that Amazon sells as opposed to one of its third-party sellers, they pay nothing to ship it to you.
Right.
It's fully piggybacked. So
but at least they've employed thousands and thousands of delivery people.
Well, their delivery people pee in jars, right? And their warehouse workers are injured seriously at 3 times the rate of warehouse workers in other warehouses. And this brings me to another source of discipline that we used to have on tech firms that we don't have anymore. So tech firms used to be disciplined by competitors, by regulators, by interoperable technology, but also by their workers.
Right.
So tech workers, you know this story, right? How do you become a tech worker? You have your mind blown by technology, right? You fall in love with it. It shows you your people. It shows you the words for what matter to you. There's a reason that the groups of people who are tech early adopters are all people who are socially disfavored in some way, whether that's people with extreme political views or people with sexual peccadillos that are not widely acceptable, or kids or terrorists, right? It's because the mainstream system doesn't work for them. If they try to communicate the things they want to say through the mainstream system, they get punished in some way, right? So it is worth their investing in learning how to do it. Pornographers aren't technowophiles. It's just that pornographers couldn't show movies at the AMC, so they figured out the VCR, right? Yeah. And so, that's how we get these people. And so tech workers, they're often, I call it Tron-pilled, right? They fight for the user and they want other people to have the mind-opening, life-changing experience of using technology to find your people that they had, to find what matters to them that they had. And they come to tech firms with this. And historically, the tech workforce was super powerful, even though they weren't unionized, because they were scarce and because they were really productive. So the National Bureau of Economic Research, a government agency that does these working papers about how key aspects of the American economy work, they published a working paper that estimated the top line revenue increase per tech worker in Silicon Valley at $1 million per worker. Right. This is why if you went to work for Google, they were giving you free kombucha and massages, and the surgeon would freeze your eggs so you could work through your fertile years. It's not because they were good-natured slobs, right? Yeah. It's because you made them $1 million a year and they couldn't replace you. And so tech workers, they didn't see the need to unionize because they were being treated really well. Right. And, if they told their boss, I won't enshittify that thing that I missed my mother's funeral to ship on time because I'm so Tron-pilled, their boss couldn't say, no, you do it or I fire you, because they couldn't replace them.
Right. And they remember, the Boston Dynamics or whatever, they were making those little army robots. And Googlers were like, screw this.
And workers walked out over sexual abuse. They walked out over drone programs.
Forced the company to change policies and to lose contracts. It's gone.
Google abandoned Jedi, right? This $10 billion IT contract for the Pentagon because their workers walked out over it. Right. So the workers were really powerful, but they weren't unionized. They didn't see the need to. This is one of those things where it's a kind of paradox of unionization that at, the moment that you're strong and where you could easily get a union, you don't think you need it because your bosses are treating you good. But we know how Jeff Bezos treats a worker he's not afraid of. Right? It's his warehouse workers.
They lose their fingers.
Yeah. That's his drivers, right? The reason if you're a programmer at Amazon, you get to show up for work with a pink mohawk and facial piercings and a black t-shirt that says things your boss doesn't understand but makes him feel weird. It's not that they're sentimental about programmers.
No, because you know how to program.
They're afraid of you, right? Well, they're not afraid of you anymore. We had 500,000 tech layoffs in the last 3 years in this country.
And why is that? Because of AI?
No. The reason they're all in on AI is because they are fantasizing furiously about the day that they can have a programmer who won't tell them to fuck off.
Does this apply to America itself? In other words, the U.S. Constitution as a piece of software that it could have been modified, but America feels like it's enshittifying.
Yeah, I think that I think that if you say, well, it's the collapse in discipline of tech bosses, and you have a collapse in discipline of politicians too. So, for example, gerrymandering is a collapse in discipline. Because if you're not in a competitive seat, then rather than having to keep the people who vote for you happy, you have to keep party insiders happy.
Right.
And not only that, but like parties are really weak institutions versus elections. Elections are pretty robust institutions. They're hard to do, right? That's why it's a big deal when we have an election. You wouldn't want to run a party like you run like a party internal election like you run a general, right? Because that's just like it's too much overhead to do party decision making. But when the decision making happens inside the party instead of at the poll, then what you have now is this very capturable institution that is ultimately the institution making the decision. So a little side note here. So I was a Londoner for 13 years. I lived in Hackney, which is the most populous borough. It's like a city in the United Kingdom. And I had a problem with the people who owned the building next door. There were Spanish cocaine runners who bought the building next door and were renovating it into an illegal hotel. And they did all of their renovation work between midnight and 6 a.m., jackhammering the party wall between them and my bedroom while I had an infant daughter. It was really bad. And I couldn't get Hackney noise control out. And I was trying to get my counselor to act. And I would go to his office hours and he wouldn't show up and so on. And I was complaining about it on Twitter. And I was like at the coffee shop and someone who recognized me came up and said, "Oh, I saw you complaining about your counselor on Twitter." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "This is a Labour safe seat." Yeah, sure. Hackney's been Labour forever. He said, "So whoever is nominated to be your counselor is the counselor." I'm like, "Yeah." And he said, "Do you know how many people were at the nomination meeting for your counselor? 12. Right? So this guy who represents the most populous borough in the United Kingdom
was picked by 12 people.
7 of them. Right? So that guy answers to 7 people, right? And that's why he didn't give a shit, right? So, the money in politics, the gerrymandering, they go together, right? Because like when you have gerrymandering, right, when you're not responsible to voters, then it becomes an auction, right? Because you don't have to worry about how many voters you anger if your seat is safe, which means that you can accept the most money.
Which is why it's a great metaphor for what tech companies are doing. It's like you can either do well by making a great product that people want to use, or you can do well by changing the rules through which
by locking people in,
right,
and then preventing them from leaving and then turning the screws on them.
Now, but Peter Thiel would call that going from 0 to 1. He would call that going one order of magnitude above the actual competition and controlling the game itself, and that's the desired place to go.
Well, it's true. Every capitalist wants to be a rentier. Right. So, profits are money you get from doing something, and rents are money you get from owning something.
Doing nothing, yeah.
Owning something.
Okay.
Right. And so, and rents are much more insulated from competitive pressure than profits. So, the forces that cause profits to fall cause rents to rise.
Right.
So say you're like, you own a coffee shop, right? And like a much better coffee shop opens across the street and like all your customers and all your baristas go work there, right? And you go out of business, right? You've been exposed to competitive risk and you've lost everything. Your landlord now has an empty storefront on a street with a really hot coffee shop.
Right.
You're like, it's good for your landlord.
It over.
Yeah. It's good for your landlord that you were outcompeted by the guy across the street.
Yeah.
Right. So everyone would like to be insulated, right? Every pirate wants to be an admiral. Right? Everyone would like to be insulated from risk, right? And, this is why we have the gig economy. So if you're a taxi company, you got to pay your drivers when they don't have a passenger in the seat. So you are taking the risk that your driver will drive around and around and not have a fare. When you're at Uber, you push that risk off onto your driver.
Right. When you're a university and have professors, your risk is that a professor's class won't be filled.
Right.
If you got adjuncts, then you don't.
That's right. You only pay them when that's right. 0 hours contracts. All of these things are about moving risk around, right? Moving costs, moving externalities
moving it
around.
Down to...
And shit flows downhill.
Yeah.
And so, one of the reasons that we historically fought monopoly was not because they were inefficient or because they were... they would raise prices or whatever. We fought monopolies because we did not want power concentrated into private hands because we thought that it would be very hard to take it back from them if they decided to abuse it. So if you think about the history of healthcare, right? When we allowed pharma companies to consolidate, they started to put the screws to hospitals, right? So the hospitals formed regional monopolies to say, if you try to charge us a lot of money on your chemotherapy drug, no one in this city is going to take that drug.
Right.
So we're going to push your prices down. But now they have seller power as against their insurers. So they turn to the insurers and they go, guess what? A hospital bed is now 10 times as much. So you have regional consolidation in insurance. Most people have between 1 and 3 insurers they can pick for their healthcare insurer. And so now you have consolidation all through the supply chain, pharmacy benefit managers, med tech, hospital beds, the whole stack, right?
Yeah.
Who's not organized? Patients and healthcare workers.
Right.
Right?
I know, because there's only 2 people you need in the thing. Just like in my world, students and professors. So it's like, can't we just teach?
And you see this in the university, you see it in healthcare. So patients now pay more for worse health outcomes, and healthcare workers are paid less for worse working conditions. Right? So this is what you get when you allow consolidation. This is why we didn't want monopolies. You know, when John Sherman, who was the senator in 1890 who passed the Sherman Act, the first antitrust bill, the brother of Tecumseh Sherman, right? The guy who burned Atlanta, right? So John Sherman is stumping for the Sherman Act, and he says, if we would not tolerate a king over our country, we should not tolerate an autocrat of trade over the necessaries of life.
Exactly, you would think, but they got left out of the Constitution.
Well, they did, but we had effective antitrust from the Gilded Age, right? The end of the Gilded Age. That's what ended the Gilded Age until the mid-70s.
And then, so are you suggesting antitrust is the answer now? And if it is, how do we as just little people voting for monopolized gerrymandered politicians do that?
So this is really interesting because we got it without taking any conscious action. We've had a global surge in antitrust everywhere. Right? It's not just like, so Trump 1 did some antitrust. The Google case that they just lost, that started under Trump 1. The FTC investigation of Facebook, that started under Trump 1. Trump was doing this. Biden did it like no one we've ever seen since the Carter administration.
Right.
They did more
Even
stuff,
right to repair,
which is also antitrust, right? Which is also about breaking up corporate power and monopolies, right?
Right, and letting your local auto repair guy fix your car instead of having to go to the BMW.
You, right? And stopping them from having the right to decide, oh, this is beyond repair, so now you have to let us sell you a replacement, which is Apple's favorite wheeze, right? So we got more under Biden than we'd had in 40 years, right? It was an incredible moment. And so we can say, well, maybe there's the character of these men. Maybe it was the makeup of their parties. So, you know, I think Biden, who was like a corporate shill for the whole time he was in Congress and in the Senate, I don't think he had a change of heart. I think that like the Sanders-Warren wing of the party made him do it, right? So maybe we say, oh, it's the Sanders-Warren wing of the party, but it doesn't explain why they were so powerful. And to explain why they're so powerful, you also have to explain why in the United Kingdom, the Competition and Markets Authority, which is their equivalent of the FTC, did more under like 4 or 5 completely shambolic, right-wing, fanatical, dysfunctional governments, post-Brexit governments, did more than they had in the 40 years before then. Why did the European Union give us the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act? How come we got antitrust in Spain, in Germany, in France? How come it happened in Australia and South Korea, Japan and Singapore? Why did China double down on antitrust during that period? Canada, where I'm from, our Competition Bureau was one of the weakest competition regulators in the world. In its entire history, it had challenged 3 mergers, but it had successfully challenged 0 mergers. We had never had a successful merger challenge from the Competition Bureau in Canada in its entire history as a regulator. Last year, Justin Trudeau, who's kind of a corporate shill, whipped his party to pass a new bill that created the most expansive powers for Canada's competition regulator of any regulator in the world. Right? So how did this all happen? Where did this come from? Because you say, oh, well, what can we do to do this? Well, there's this political tailwind. We need to get behind it. We need to find the politicians who want to do it. There's a lot you can do at the state and local level. And to answer your question about what you should do right now, go to efa.eff.org. That's the Electronic Frontier Alliance. It's a network of regional and local groups. They work on all of these issues, as well as things like protecting the privacy of people seeking abortions and protecting the privacy of people who ICE is trying to round up and, you know, stopping the cops from doing facial recognition, all this other stuff, good stuff in your community, efa.eff.org. But like, what's going on in the world? Well, you know, there's this idea to finance Stein's law that anything that can't go on forever eventually stops. I think people got pissed off about corporate power, concentrated power. They don't have the words to express it. The same way before, like the word ecology was in our lexicon, we didn't understand how, maybe like endangered owls in the ozone layer were connected. And yet, like, even though like gaseous composition of the upper atmosphere and charismatic nocturnal avians are not obviously the same thing, now we have this concept, we can connect them. In the same way, like, people just started to think, like, what is it that makes concentrated power? Well, it's monopoly. Monopoly is concentrated power. Concentrated power is monopoly. There is this like anti-monopoly law, and I think politicians are out there. Every one of them is peddling their favorite thing. We know who politicians are. They're weirdos. They're obsessives. Speaking as a weird obsessive, right? They've all got the one weird thing they're really obsessed with, and the ones that are talking monopoly, suddenly people are going, monopoly? Oh, wow, that sounds important. We should do something about monopoly, right? So that's happening. And there's this tailwind, and it's driving these politicians, driving this agenda. And then there's another thing that's happening, which I call billionaire on trillionaire violence. So you have a lot of these giant companies that are really fucking slightly less giant companies.
Right.
Right? So like Daniel Ek, the guy who started Spotify, horrible monopolist, screwing every musician alive, right? He is really angry that 30 cents on every dollar he brings in is being stolen by Apple. Right? Because they control the payment processing on the iPhone, and they charge 30 cents on every dollar. And so he's like out there suing in the European Union, in the United States, over Apple and Google's monopoly on the App Store market. Same is happening with Epic Games, right? The people who make Fortnite. Again, billionaire on trillionaire violence. Epic has its own games marketplace where they take 30 cents out of every dollar that the people who sell on that make. They think that's okay, right? They just don't think it's okay when Apple does it to them. But you have this weird coalition emerging of people who want the same thing for different reasons. And political scientists will tell you that if you look at the empirical outcomes, that the policy preferences of everyday people do not matter to political outcomes. The stuff that you and I want has no bearing on our policy outcomes. It is the preferences of business lobbies and commercial elites that determine our policy outcomes. Time and again, you look at thousands of policy outcomes and you see this. However, for the first time in 50 years, you have something that business elites hate that's happening. And it's happening partly because it's very popular among the public. Mm-hmm. And it's happening because it is very unpopular with a small number of very rich people. And so you combine those two and something quite magical happens. And it's the thing that I find very exciting about what's going on right now.
Which gives you hope then?
I have no optimism, but I have a lot of hope.
Yeah.
I don't think things are going to get better no matter what we do, and I don't think things are going to get worse no matter what we do. I'm not an optimist. I'm not a pessimist. I think if we do stuff, we're down here. We want to get up here. If we ascend a little bit up that gradient, even though we can't see the path that goes all the way to the top, we can see from here terrain that was not visible when we were down here. There are moves that become available to us if we take even a little step towards the world we want. And each step we take reveals more terrain. And I am hopeful in the sense that I believe that so long as you've got a move you can make, then there's still room for more moves to be made.
Right, exactly. There's still moves in the game.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. Thanks for stopping by, Doug. Cory. I love you. Get Enshittification. Go to pluralistic.net. Support Team Human too. Go to teamhuman.fm and click on support. Get an ad-free version of the show. If you don't have the ad-free version of the show, then support Everyone's Earth, our soul and loving sponsor, who make like Kobe dryer sheets and soon change diapers, biodegradable, good for the world, good for your baby, and everyone will be happy. You've been on Team Human, our last best hope for peeps. Team Human is made possible by Everyone's Earth, the maker of Kobe dryer sheets and a growing line of sustainably sourced and manufactured products that are also completely 100% biodegradable. Yes, your wash cycle can now also be a part of the cycle of life. Moreover, in addition to supporting a company that's actually trying to fix the Procter & Gamble nightmare in which we've become enmeshed, you'll be supporting this show. And as a Team Human Insider, you can also get a 10% discount on Everyone's Earth by using the discount code RUSH10. How's that?